Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 619 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's episode of the podcast is the second in the Defining Thyroid series, and today Jenny Smith and I are going to talk about the glands, pituitary, and thyroid. The thyroid and pituitary glands. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh my God, Scott, so exciting. What are you doing to me? I know. But listen, it's important. If you have autoimmune, you very well may run into hyper or hypothyroidism at some point. Hashimoto's disease, in fact, could be around the corner. You need to know what to look for. So, while you might not think this is exciting, it is very needed and necessary. Listen and educate yourself. You'll be glad you did. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Touched by Type 1. Learn more about my favorite diabetes organization at touchedbytype1.org. You can also find them on Facebook and Instagram. And I heard recently, a little birdie told me that I will be speaking at their next event. I think it's in August. That's a ways away. But anyway, go orient yourself with their webpage, so that when I say to you, I'm speaking at the next Touched by Type 1 event, you'll go, oh, I know right where to go, touchedbytype1.org, and you can go get yourself some tickets. If you're a U.S. resident who has type 1 diabetes or is the caregiver for someone who has type 1, you could take the survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox in fewer than 10 minutes. When you do this, it will be completely anonymous. It will be HIPAA compliant. You will be helping people with type 1 diabetes, and you will be supporting the podcast. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. If you're looking for the Defining Diabetes series, they're available in your podcast player or at juiceboxpodcast.com. At that website, you'll also find the Diabetes Pro Tip series, Ask Scott and Jenny, the Diabetes Variables episodes, After Dark episodes, algorithm pumping based episodes, How We Eat series. It's all right there. It's either in your podcast player or at juiceboxpodcast.com. At the end of this episode, and at the end of every Defining Thyroid episode, I will list the symptoms of hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, and Graves' disease. Do you want to do the glands now, thyroid and pituitary?
Sure.
Okay. The weirdest part is the starting over, because you have to remember it's another episode. I used to remember in the Defining Diabetes, I'd be like, hey, Jenny. like we had just seen each other for the first time.
Yes.
Well, hey, Jenny. Today, I'd like to define what a thyroid gland and a pituitary gland are.
Sure.
So you want to start, or should I read a definition and then we'll talk?
Yeah, you can read the definition. I think it's the most specific.
Thyroid gland is an endocrine gland located in the neck that produces hormones to regulate metabolism. The thyroid gland is controlled by the pituitary gland, which secretes TSH in an effort to trigger thyroid hormone production. But sometimes the thyroid simply won't release enough hormones. An underactive thyroid gland, one that doesn't produce enough hormones, will result in hypothyroidism.
Good job.
That's not a bad read, actually. I felt pretty good
about
that.
It was a very good read.
I didn't even I'm very proud of myself. I don't even, 50 years old, I read 2 sentences and I'm like, wow, look at me. Yay.
You get the Gold Star Reading Award for the day.
So let's go over it first. Thyroid is where in your body?
So it's located in your neck, kind of like this beside that bumpiness that you could feel going down the middle of the front of your neck, right? What you would consider your throat, kind of on either side. That's why it's called like a butterfly type gland, because if you imagine the butterfly body being the middle, the wings sort of spread to the sides of your neck, right? So that's why if you've ever had an evaluation by a doctor, they will put 2 fingers typically on both sides of that middle of your neck and ask you to swallow.
Okay. What happens when you swallow? They can find bumps then on it?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So if there are bumps present indicating something is not going the right way with the gland, then they would essentially do more testing to reveal, what might be the potential problem.
Right. And will they but they won't feel bumps if I'm hypothyroid without Hashimoto's though. Is that correct?
Correct. I believe that the bumps come specific to the autoimmune Hashimoto's.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, and sometimes when you see people who have that little like scar on their neck, that could be that they had thyroid cancer, right? Or that their Hashimoto's was so out of or for Graves, right?
Graves' disease.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Which is kind of the opposite in terms of hyper. I mean, we all talk about hypos and hypers, right? But this is a very different specific reason for that. But hyper would be, the potential for having like a thyroidectomy or surgical removal of some parts. But most often it's cancer.
Yeah. We'll talk about that when we define Graves' disease, I think. Okay. So that's where the actual
thyroid hormones come from.
And the gland is right there, right?
The gland is right there.
We understand that. Okay. Now the pituitary gland is a small gland the size of a peanut that is located behind the eyes of the base of the brain. It secretes thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, which helps control thyroid function. I didn't realize that. So
yes. So TSH does not. TSH is regulated by the way that the pituitary gland talks to the thyroid gland, essentially.
And they're nowhere near each other. The body's amazing.
No, isn't the body? I know.
I mean, really, if they were talking, you think you'd make them neighbors, but I guess not.
But I guess not. I know.
I included pituitary in here because I don't think it gets talked about much when you actually have hypothyroidism, nor do I think anybody's ever going to bring it up to you while you're treating it or living with it. But
yeah, because most people just think that there's an issue here, right? Mm-hmm. And so while the issue does lie in the thyroid, the way that the pituitary gland responds to the signals it's getting, they work together. So they're both important to understand, definitely.
Okay. Is there anything else people need to know? I mean, that's pretty cut and dry and simple, but they should know their thyroid gland is in their neck and that it can be looked at manually by their doctor, visually, or they could have an MRI taken of it as well. Those are the ways it would be looked at, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I will put some more important stuff that people need to know after I let you go at the end of this. All right. Hold on a second. Now I need to keep track of what we've done because that is
that's a good idea.
While I'm moving to the next one, I'll tell people that one time.
Check them off.
There was one time in 2021 where I had Jenny do a diabetes variable, and then like 3 weeks later we saw each other and we did the same exact variable again. And oddly, neither of us knew that it happened at the time.
That's all right.
I'm very amused by that. Why don't we now talk about...
Well, what would be interesting would be to listen to both of those episodes and to see were they similar enough.
And I did, Jenny, and I put them together in their variable. I forget which one it was, because interestingly enough, we sort of built on what we said previously without knowing it.
Oh, okay.
It was very interesting.
Maybe with a subconscious realization that we've already talked about this, but these are the additional pieces to it, right?
No one said it out loud, so I put them together.
It's all okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's put together here.
I think maybe the next thing would really be, since we talked about like Hashimoto's, hypo, the glands that are specifically involved, maybe the types of tests, like the hormones that would be being produced and how they work.
Okay. So, talk about, you think
like TSH, T4, T3.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
A huge thanks to Touched by Type 1 for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Don't forget to check them out on Facebook and Instagram. Touched by Type 1's mission is to elevate awareness of type 1 diabetes, raise funds to find a cure, and inspire those with diabetes to thrive. touchedbytype1.org. And if you're a U.S. resident who has type 1 or is the caregiver of someone with type 1, please go take the survey at t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Looking for community around type 1 diabetes? Look no further than Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. It's a private group with 20,000 people just like you. Thanks so much for listening today. Please stop back frequently for more episodes of the Juicebox Podcast and to continue with the Defining Thyroid series. If you like Jenny, she's for hire. You can find her at integrateddiabetes.com. She helps people with their type 1 diabetes. She's really good at it too. If you're enjoying the Juicebox Podcast and you're listening in an app but you're not subscribed or following, please hit subscribe and follow in that app. And don't forget to tell a friend. Hey, if you find the podcast on YouTube, we started putting up animated versions of the Defining Diabetes series. They're really cute, great for kids, very visual. Go find it. All right, now let's go through the symptoms. We will start with hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism signs and symptoms may include fatigue, increased sensitivity to cold, constipation, dry skin, weight gain, puffy face, hoarseness, muscle weakness, elevated blood cholesterol level, muscle aches, tenderness, and stiffness, pain, stiffness, or swelling in your joints, heavier than normal or irregular menstrual periods, thinning hair, slow heart rate, depression, impaired memory, enlarged thyroid gland. In infants, you're looking for a yellowing of the skin and whites of the eyes, which is commonly called jaundice. In most cases, this occurs when a baby's liver can't metabolize a substance called bilirubin, which normally forms when the body recycles old or damaged red blood cells. You also might see a larger protruding tongue, difficulty breathing, hoarse crying, or an umbilical hernia. As progression happens in infants, you may move on to constipation, poor muscle tone, or excessive sleepiness. Hypothyroidism in children and teens may indicate with poor growth, resulting in a short stature, delayed development of permanent teeth, delayed puberty, poor mental development. That list is from the Mayo Clinic. Let's move on now to hyperthyroidism. This list is from the Cleveland Clinic. Hyperthyroidism may present with rapid heartbeat or palpitations, feeling shaky and or nervous, weight loss, increased appetite, diarrhea, and more frequent bowel movements, vision changes, thin, warm, and moist skin, menstrual changes, intolerance to heat and excessive sweating, sleep issues, swelling and enlargement of the neck from an enlarged thyroid gland, hair loss and change in hair texture, it would get brittle, bulging of the eyes, as seen with Graves' disease, and muscle weakness. Okay, back to the Mayo Clinic for Graves' disease. You're looking for anxiety and irritability, a fine tremor of the hands or fingers, heat sensitivity, and an increase in perspiration or warm or moist skin, weight loss despite normal eating habits, enlarged thyroid gland, change in menstrual cycle, erectile dysfunction or reduced libido, frequent bowel movements, bulging eyes, fatigue, thick red skin usually on the shins or tops of the feet, rapid or irregular heartbeat, palpitations, sleep disturbance. If you, your child, or someone you love has any of these symptoms, please seek medical attention. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.